Once the Ohio River Valley and areas west were safe for settlement, it launched one of the greatest land rushes in American history. As pioneers headed across the Trans-Appalachian West, the Ohio River became a convenient means of westward movement. In the early days of settlement, flatboats and keelboats were used to travel down the Ohio.
If you come down the river, you can bring more with you. You can bring goods that you couldn't come through the gap with. In fact, through the Cumberland Gap, you couldn't come except by horseback until the 1790s. So if you wanted to bring things with you to Kentucky, you had to come down one of the rivers. Come down the Kentucky River, come down the Licking River. All these were pathways into Kentucky. The rivers and then the Bison trails brought people to Kentucky. These were the first roads, in a sense, that brought the settlers that made this land their home.
Land ownership was generally recorded in an area as soon as settlers arrived. Warrants authorizing surveys of the land were issued to persons qualified to receive grants for military service or cash payments. Most of the land in northern Kentucky near the point was purchased by wealthy members of the Virginia gentry. They viewed land ownership as a source of wealth and political power.
They were related to Thomas Jefferson and James Madison and John Marshall, the first Supreme Court justice. So they were among the wealthiest people in Virginia and really the best connected politically. So if we get an idea that somehow this area was settled by small farmers who, had 5-acre plots, if they did, they were renting them from the people who originally got the land grants for the area.
Northern Kentucky was shaped by its location on the expanding western frontier. Its population was mostly military. With troops garrisoned at Fort Washington across from the mouth of the Licking, the few civilians who were here did business with the outpost.
So because there were about 300 soldiers around Fort Washington, commerce began to develop. And part of that commerce was a ferry operated by a Francis Kennedy who moved into the area. And those of us in Covington are probably more familiar with his brother Thomas Kennedy, who came 3 years later to operate that ferry on the southern side of the river at the point where the Licking River and the Ohio rivers collide. And Thomas Kennedy would eventually buy the land around that area and live on a farm there. You can still see a plaque designating where Thomas Kennedy's home was. It's in George Rogers Clark Park.